They told you that a steady paycheck is safety amor. That was the first lie. You've been programmed to be a pawn in someone else's empire while they feed you the illusion of stability. But real wealth isn't about the numbers in your bank account. It's about the mastery of power itself. Machiavelli warned us that fortune is a woman who only yields to the bold. If you're still waiting for luck, you've already lost. Today, we stop obeying and start commanding. This is the architect's guide to building a fortune from the ashes of your routine. Welcome to the arena. Most people think wealth is a destination. They are wrong. Wealth is a psychological state. From the moment you entered a classroom, you were programmed to sit still, wait for instructions, and trade your time for a grade. That was the blueprint for your obedience. The system doesn't want kings, it wants predictable gears, but a sovereign, an architect of their own fate, understands a dark truth. Power begins where permission ends. Consider the average 9-to-5 employee in America today. They trade their most finite asset, time, for a currency that the Fed devalues by the second. This is the ultimate theft. While you save, they print. While you wait for a raise, the cost of living doubles. Here is your first lesson. Your bank account is a reflection of your financial situation. If you think like a servant, you will live like one. Power is not granted, it is seized. But to seize it, you need a weapon that the system cannot ignore, a skill that grants you leverage over the masses. And that is where the real strategy begins. Your psychology is the fortress, but a fortress without a weapon is just a tomb. Machiavelli taught that a prince must possess virtue, the ability to impose his will upon uncertain circumstances. In the Renaissance, that weapon was steel. Today, it is the algorithm. While the American middle class trembles at the rise of artificial intelligence, the architect smiles. Why? Because AI is the ultimate digital mercenary. It doesn't sleep, it doesn't demand a pension, and it doesn't ask for permission. Most people use AI to save time, so they can consume more entertainment. They are using a nuclear reactor to light a cigarette. A sovereign uses it to multiply their output by a factor of 10, while reducing their dependence on others to 0. Look at the landscape. Copywriters, junior coders, and data analysts are being liquidated. Their obedience is no longer a currency. The only skill that matters now is the ability to command the machine. This is your Machiavellian skill, the craft that grants you leverage over the masses. Remember this, in the age of automation, if you are not the one writing the prompt, you are the one being replaced by it. But even with the sharpest blade, a prince can still fall, not because of his enemies, but because of his friends. And that is the most brutal choice you will ever make. Isolation is the crucible of greatness. Machiavelli warned that a ruler's downfall often begins with poor alliances. Most people in your circle are not your friends. They are anchors. When you announce your ambition, they won't celebrate. They will mock, not out of malice, but because your growth highlights their stagnation. Imagine you tell your circle you're building a business. They'll tell you to be, quote, realistic. They'll mention the failure rate of startups. They aren't protecting you, they are protecting their own comfort. In America, we call this the crabs in a bucket mentality. To rise, you must execute the social guillotine, cut ties with the powerless. It will be lonely, yes. But that loneliness is the silence you need to hear your own strategy. Your energy is finite. Every minute spent discussing gossip or the latest Netflix trend is a minute stolen from your empire. Here is your lesson. You cannot build a castle surrounded by people who are content living in the mud. Protect your mind, like a fortress. Close every gate. Guard every wall. But once the room is empty, You cannot leave it a vacuum. You must fill it with the masters of the game, and that is where proximity becomes your ultimate shadow. Now that the room is empty, and the noise of mediocrity has been silenced, you must fill that void with intelligence. Machiavelli observed that men almost always follow the beaten path. But if you wish to rise among princes, you must stand where princes stand. This is the law of proximity. In Renaissance Florence, the Medici family didn't just build wealth, they engineered a dynasty by surrounding themselves with the greatest minds of their age. They understood that proximity is the shadow of influence. Whoever you stand beside long enough, you eventually become. Most people seek validation from those beneath them, because it's easier to be admired than to be corrected. But the sovereign seeks the blade. You need a circle that sharpens your mind, not one that softens your resolve. In modern America, this means your environment extends beyond your neighborhood. It is the masterminds you join, the mentors you apprentice under, and the digital inner circles you pay to enter. Here is your lesson. Powerful people respect movement, not potential. If you want to enter the room, do not show up as a fan. Show up as a contributor. Bring a dossier of value, not a request for a handout. Be the strategic architect who prepares for every encounter, like a general mapping a conquest. But remember, proximity to greatness is uncomfortable. It is a mirror that shows you exactly how small you currently are. To close that gap, you need more than just names in your contact list. You need a weapon that can fund your ascension. And that is where we must talk about the dark mechanics of capital. Proximity gets you in the room, but capital keeps you there. Most Americans are raised to fear debt. You've been told to pay off your credit cards and live debt-free. That is advice for the peasants. The architect understands a darker, more potent mechanic: weaponized debt. While the masses see debt as chains, the elite see it as a sword. Consider the strategy used by the top 1%. Buy, borrow, die. They buy assets like real estate or stocks. They never sell, because selling is a taxable event. Instead, they borrow against those assets to fund their lifestyle. This is tax-free cash. No income tax, no capital gains tax, just raw, liquid power. Look at Larry Ellison or Elon Musk. They don't sell their shares to buy yachts or rockets. They take loans against them. They are using the bank's money to stay rich, while their assets continue to grow. This is how you outpace inflation. This is how you defeat the system at its own game. Here is your lesson. Debt for consumption is slavery. Debt for expansion is sovereignty. If you use debt to buy a liability, you are a servant. If you use it to build an empire, you are a prince. But to secure these loans, to build these alliances, you need more than just a balance sheet. You need the ability to command the minds of others. And that is the art of war in the world of sales. Wealth is the arsenal, but persuasion is the commander. Most of you recoil at the word sales. You think of a used car lot or a desperate cold caller. That is the servant's view. To the architect, persuasion is the art of ruling mind, without the use of force. Machiavelli taught that a prince must be both the lion and the fox. The lion to scare off wolves, and the fox to recognize traps. In the digital age, your fox-like virtue is marketing. Consider Steve Jobs. He didn't sell glass and silicon, he sold an identity. He sold the rebellion against the status quo. He understood that men are driven by two principal impulses, either by love or by fear. If they do not love your vision, they must fear the reality of being left behind. This is not manipulation. This is strategic leadership. Every interaction in your life is a pitch. Whether you are asking for a loan or building a team, You are selling a future. Here is your lesson. You cannot lead others to believe in you until you have conquered your own doubt. The uncommitted voice tremble. The committed voice commands. Master the language of influence, or you will spend your life translating for someone else. But even a master orator cannot build a fortress on shifting sands. You need precision. You need the cold, hard logic of the campaign. And that law where your ambition meets the mathematics of conquest. Persuasion is the spirit, but arithmetic is the body of your empire. Most people dream in clouds. They want to be done, quote, rich. But rich is not a target. It is fog. The architect, however, deals in the cold geometry of reality. Machiavelli knew that fortune is the arbiter of half our actions, but the other half is ours to control through measurement. If you want $1 million, stop wishing for it and start calculating it. $1 million is simply $2,740 per day for 1 year. That is your battlefield number. Now, look at your grid. How do you hit that number? Is it 10,000 people paying you a $100 margin, or is it 10 partners paying you $100,000 for a high-leverage solution? In America, where the cost of living and inflation are silent assassins, your math must be aggressive. You are not just fighting for a number. You are fighting for the speed of that number. Here is your lesson. You cannot rule what you do not measure. If you cannot define your daily conquest in dollars and cents, you are not a strategist. You are a spectator. Consistency is the only bridge between a fantasy and a dynasty. But even with the perfect map, most men will never leave the harbor. They are paralyzed by the shore. And that is the universal moment of truth, where your ambition, finally, outgrows your safety. Mathematics is the map, but the Rubicon is the march. Most men fail, not because they lack a plan, but because they keep an escape route. They have a plan B tucked away, a safety net of mediocrity that they can fall back into the moment things get difficult. This is a fatal error. Machiavelli understood that greatness is born from necessity. When you remove the option to retreat, your mind enters a state of absolute focus. Think of Julius Caesar at the banks of the Rubicon River. To cross was to declare war on Rome. To turn back was to disappear into history. He crossed, honored them, and the world changed. In the modern world, this is the moment you stop seeking permission from the system and start imposing your will upon it. It's the day you realize that your comfort is a cage. Your plan B is actually a poison. It keeps you weak because it keeps you safe. Here is your lesson. Burn the ships. If you want to take the island, you must leave yourself no way to sail back. When failure is no longer an option, victory becomes the only reality. But once you have crossed the river, you cannot simply wander. You need a structure for your conquest, a timeline that turns your audacity into an empire. And that is the 7-year blueprint of the modern sovereign. A prince does not gamble on a weekend. He plans for a decade. If you want to escape the 9-to-5 matrix, you must stop thinking in months and start thinking in phases. This is your 7-year blueprint to sovereignty. Years 1 and 2 are the years of the apprenticeship. During this phase, you do not quit your job, you use it. Your salary is the fuel for your education. You spend every night and every weekend mastering your Machiavellian skill, whether it's code, marketing, or complex finance. You are building your digital arsenal. Years 3 to 5 are the years of the fortress. This is where you deploy. You start your venture, you build your systems, and you begin the process of buy, borrow, and die. You move from selling your time to owning assets that command time. It will be the hardest phase. You will be exhausted. You will be isolated. But remember, the wall of the fortress is built one brick at a time. By years 6 and 7, you reach the phase of ascension. This is where your systems outpace your expenses. This is where you cross the threshold from an employee to a sovereign. Here is your lesson. Most people overestimate what they can do in a year, and they underestimate what they can do in 7. Discipline is the bridge between goals and accomplishment. But even with an empire at your feet, the greatest danger is yet to come. The danger of peace. To survive, you must maintain the one thing that got you here. The hunger, and that is the final law of the modern prince. Wealth is not a number. It is a mirror, reflecting your capacity for mastery, risk, and resilience. But here is the final trap, the danger of peace. Machiavelli wrote that fortune yields to those who strike her with precision and power. But the moment you feel safe, you invite decay. In the hills of Silicon Valley and the towers of Manhattan, empires fall, not because of external enemies, but because the architects grew comfortable. They lost the hunger that built the walls in the first place. You must wake each day with the reminder that you are not yet who you could be. Look at your reality, then look at your vision. Feel that gap. Do not numb it. Use it. That tension is the fire that keeps your sword sharp. Here is your final lesson. A sovereign never retires. He only expands his dominion. Comfort is the grave of greatness. If you stop moving, the world will pass you by. You have the blueprint. You have the arithmetic. Now, you need the nerve to act. But building a fortune is only half the battle. Defending it from the hidden laws of the state is the real war. If you want to understand how to build a legacy that cannot be taken, watch the next video right here. Because the next law of wealth is not about money at all. It is about dominion. Stay sharp.